two things I want to talk to you about. So we lost a sense of the sacred.
Yeah.
And do oaths even mean anything anymore? So how do you have a sense of, I have to live up to an oath or a vow if you've lost a sense of what it means for things to be sacred? Sacred being set apart, right? Things that are, they have a purpose and a plan. And when you talk about sacred things, that purpose and plan is given by God. So the oaths thing, like how do we convince people today that oaths matter? When you take a vow, it matters.
It matters, that your word matters. It's so hard because it's like a lot of times people don't see the instant consequences from it. You know, they don't see like you broke the vow and right away you're going to get punished for it. I think there's a lag in the time from when they get hit over the head from not doing what they promised in front of God, or whether that's, I mean, in court you do, it's perjury. You know, you can go to jail.
Well, like even secularly, cops take an oath to protect and serve.
Yeah.
Does that mean anything anymore?
And
like what makes it mean something? I guess is what I'm trying to get at.
So I heard a story. I just thought about this. So there's a story about a pastor who he like embezzled a bunch of money, did all this illegal stuff, and someone went to go visit him. I forgot who the pastor was. Someone went to go visit him, and he said, "When did you stop loving God?" He said, "I never stopped loving God." He said, "Well, how did you do all these things?" He said, "I stopped fearing God." He still loved God. We talk so much, oh, love God, which is great, but that's only half of the equation. If we just think that God's going to love us no matter what we do, then it's a false sense of like who God is. Because that reverence and that fear of God isn't we have to be in the corner cowering from him, but we have to respect him for who he is and what he said and what he's promised to happen. If God, you know, Jesus talked just about more, it was marriage and hell. He talked more than anything else.
Yeah.
You know, so just to act like, well, he's going to love me no matter what. Yes, true. But there's also consequences for our actions in this life. And when people, especially who are religious, who fall away from their oaths or, you know, the scandals in the church, all these different things, is that they stop thinking about that fear of God, that reverence, that awe, you're God and I'm not, that I'm going to, but it's hard. We don't have to see him as like he's there just trying to put his finger down on me all the time. I like to think of it as reverence. I have to stop and think about how awesome, how big, how much he made the whole world by speaking into existence, that he is, you know, all knowing, all loving, all those things. But if we just focus on the mercy of God and not on his justice, then that we can become skewed. Just like whenever I'm contemplating like sinning, if I think about, wow, I can just go to confession, I'll commit the sin because I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna be forgiven anyways. God loves me. I'll just go to the confession this week. But before I sin, if I think about God's justice, I may be less inclined to do that sin. And that's where it's a tension and a balance between the fear and love. We should love God out of fear, but not fear God out of love. It's like, it's a balance. It's like, but once we lose the fear, the oaths don't matter because we think God will forgive us no matter what. You know,
that's when God is the one to whom you take the oath. That's where that matters. What about somebody who lives in the secular space? So like, again, I mentioned cops take that oath to protect and serve.
Yeah.
Healthcare workers take the Hippocratic oath, right, to do no harm. Boils down to that. So you have the president, we'll see that we're in an election year.
Well, they usually do it
when he's
Bible.
elected.
A lot of them still do it on Bibles, but they don't take it. If they don't believe, what does it matter?
They take an oath. So it's like, if we lose a sense of the oath isn't just words that we say, but there is someone who keeps us accountable to the oath that is outside of us, right? That thing, that person outside of us that keeps us accountable to the oath, we ought to fear and respect that entity. If we lose a sense of that, then the oath means nothing.
Yeah. But that's the currency of society, is trust. Because ultimately, if you don't keep your oath, you're not someone who could be trusted. And trust is built. And if you're someone who doesn't keep your promises, doesn't keep your oaths, then the next person, and now with social media, people find out, like, you're not someone I can trust. And that's the currency of how—
Where we're seeing cracks in the wall, though, and sometimes it's more than cracks, like the wall in some areas is falling apart. There is no accountability to those that break their oaths.
Well, that's where the lawyers come in. They've ruined a lot of the things because they take that line and they can justify it on both sides, and it becomes very gray. It's like, well, it's within the law. Or
you see stuff that happens, dude.
It's sad.
You see stuff that happens and it's like, it gets you frustrated. Sometimes you're scratching your head. Sometimes you're like just, wrenching your fist at God. Like, especially with our elected officials, it's like nobody's being held accountable for anything anymore.
No, nothing of the consent of the governed. It's
like, okay, so if nobody's going to be held accountable and it's laws for thee, not for me, then it's not just going to decline. It's broken apart.
Yeah.
And now what's holding it together?
Well, that's the thing about, the Tower of Babel and the opposite of Pentecost. It's that you can have a diversity and still have unity. The problem is there's nothing that's uniting people anymore, like God or that America's, our country, that we can get under this banner that everybody agrees with, the values of in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. It's like, well, that's just a bunch of old white men wrote this thing, and who cares? And who cares about the flag? There's nothing to unite us. It's nice to have diversity, but there has to be an overarching thing that unifies us. And that's the thing. That's what God is. God is Trinity, right? He's three persons and one at the same time. He's diverse and unitive at the same time. So how do we do that in real life if we don't have these principles to help hold us together? Because the same wind that came at Pentecost, the fire, it said the wind comes through. Well, what does wind do? Wind scatters. It's the same wind that came in at the Tower of Babel when all the speech was separated and people didn't understand each other. That same wind was the Holy Spirit, knocked the tower down. And then that same wind came at Pentecost and built the church back up, and they were all understanding each other in different languages. It's the same wind. It does it both. But what was the difference is that they were unified under the Spirit of God, and those who weren't were the ones who were destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it's interesting. It's like same with fire. Fire can burn or it can cook food. It's like it has to be used for the purpose of what it's meant to do. And when it doesn't, that's what we see this chaos is going on, is there's nothing unifying anybody. It's like, okay, I don't agree with everything our politicians are doing, but I agree with America in principle, like what the country was founded on. And I would die for the country if I had to. You know what I'm saying? It's like, we don't hear that anymore. It's like, no, it's a patriarchal, it's corrupt, it's this. It's like, there's not like people flying American flags anymore. Like my neighbor's flying a Ukraine flag, but there's no American flags on my block. It's like that patriotism and that thing that unified us as Americans is gone. And when we don't have those things, and that's just the way our cities are built. I mean, our cities are so suburbs, like we're not living in cities where everyone knows each other. Everyone's going to different schools, and parents, the neighbors don't talk to each other. There's like nothing that's unifying. It's like everyone plays travel ball for different teams. Like, it's not like everyone's on the same team. Everyone's on the same barbecues. Everyone's doing the same thing. Everyone believes this, America's great. It's like, no, we're really disconnected as far as, a lot of people, only 25% or 28% of people actually who are Catholic go to mass every week. It's like we don't have that common thing that held us together, which was going to church on Sundays, which was being involved in the neighborhood and the school together. We all, said the Pledge of Allegiance every day and saluted the flag. It's like when all these things are starting to disintegrate, everything around it starts to disintegrate. There's nothing holding us together.
Did we talk about, you guys remember, there was this Christian conference that happened it was St. Louis.
Oh, no, we didn't talk about it.
We didn't talk about that?
With the guy, the pastor and the
pole dancer?
No, we didn't talk about it, but
no, we didn't hit on that, but I saw it. Yeah.
I saw it.
Okay, so maybe I've talked about this so much that I'm forgetting where I talked about it.
No, I know I've seen it.
So, because what we're talking about fear of God and having a sense of what is sacred and what do our oaths mean. So there was this conference that happened. You guys can look it up. We're not going to go into too much detail on it. But they started the conference, and this is a men's conference meant to help men grow in their Christian identity. Okay. How would you think a conference like that ought to open up?
Prayer, worship, reading the Bible, something like that.
Yeah. They opened up the conference with a male stripper coming on stage.
With a pole.
This was Catholic?
No,
it was a Christian conference.
Evangelical.
Yeah. So they start the conference with this guy coming on stage dressed. This is where this is important. He's dressed, comes up on stage, starts dancing, strips down, takes his jacket off in front of a group of guys,
like stadium
full of guys, starts dancing, pole dancing, brings out a sword, swallows the sword, the whole thing, and proceeds with his show. How is that appropriate in the context of a Christian conference for men?
Well, what was
How do you
nuts is
justify
what happens
that?
next?
What happens when you remember the pastor that came?
Yeah, then the other guy, he's a little controversial, but he speaks like forthrightly.
Well, I'm glad he did what he did.
Mark
Driscoll.
Mark Driscoll, yeah.
He comes up and he's like, guys, before I say what I prepared,
and he said he
to
prayed
say,
about it a lot.
Yeah. He's like, I got to tell you that it's the spirit of Jezebel that opened up our conference. And again, you guys can pull it up and take a look at it. And the spirit of Jezebel being that spirit that entices men to sin. That's this sexually deviant spirit. And it's like that's what opened up our gathering here together. And he doesn't go, he actually worded it really well, I thought. He doesn't go on to like finger point at anybody, but he calls it out for what it is. What we did here to start was inappropriate. And he got shouted off stage by the pastor who was leading the conference. And it's like, so we've lost, even Christians in some sense, have lost a sense of what is sacred and what our oaths are. Like our oath is, especially if you're in a leadership role in the church, to help guide others, right? Jesus says, woe to those who let one lead astray. Better that a millstone be tied around your neck and you thrown in the water. So it's like, if you're going to claim to be a Christian leader, and that's how you're presenting yourself, but you're starting off a conference in this spirit, woe to you. I mean, like, whoever thought that was a good idea ought to be fired. You know they're not going to be, because it goes back to this frustration of accountability. Who's being held accountable anymore? We've created all of these circles, like all these bubbles for ourselves, where we find like-minded people that encourage us, even if we do wrong. Who's out there calling people out? Where are the John the Baptists that are going up to these crowds and saying, hey, what you're doing is wrong?
They're scared to put their head up because they get chopped off.
They're going to get chopped off. So it's like, where are these people that are calling others out? And the problem is we're calling each other out, but nobody's listening to anyone else. Rare is the occasion where somebody calls someone else out, and then instead of you lashing back, thank you. I'm going to take that reprimand. Yeah. I thank you for the love that you've shown me and being bold enough to speak out.
Well, where's the humility? You know, that's a word that's like, it's like, you know, maybe I messed up. Maybe we shouldn't. Maybe I didn't know this guy was going to take his shirt off and it was going to be so weird. But like, how much is
they had a pole on the stage?
I know it's ridiculous.
They had a sword on the stage.
I mean,
it's like
there's no humility. I'm trying to be nice about it, but that's what happens when you know, our Protestant brothers and sisters, God bless them, that they can't see that there's a too far away, that rituals matter, that the traditions of the things that us Catholics and Orthodox do, we didn't make these things up. I mean, they're rooted in God, put them in the Old Testament. Like, look what happens when it goes so far away that now it's just to entertain people. Like, God, this isn't about entertaining us. It's nice if there's a great message and the music's great, fine. But it's not about us being entertained. And that's where the problem is. When people don't feel like they're entertained, then they want to go.
Well, that's a distinction of worship, right? Worship, we have to define worship as, because worship, especially in the West, has taken on many different forms.
Unfortunately.
Worship is doing the things of God for God.
Yeah. And in the Catholic context, it's synonymous. Worship is synonymous with sacrifice. There is no difference. Mm-hmm. Like, that's where we get mixed up between our Protestant brothers. They think worship is singing praise and worship songs, which it's an act of it. But as Catholics, when we worship God, it is synonymous with sacrifice. Mm-hmm. It's the way it's been from the Old Testament to going all the way back to Cain and Abel to what it is today. It's sacrifice. And when we lose sight of that, that's why when they say that we worship Mary, like, no, we make sacrifices. We don't make sacrifices to Mary. We adore her, we honor her, we venerate her, but we don't make sacrifices. We don't do that, because we don't see worship that way. That's the big difference. Is that that's our pinnacle, our source and summit is the holy sacrifice of the Mass. And when we lose what it's about, the sacrifice, then it's people look at it as entertainment. What am I getting out of it? And that's why so many people have fallen away, because we're trying to compete with sword swallowing pole dancers. You know, it's like, how can we compete with what the culture is trying to do?
Yeah.
It's like, I don't want to be in a church that's trying to compete.